Well, one of the joys of cold weather and February is that we can take this time to go through magazines and books and really start to plan our gardens. And for me, planning is paramount this year as I've moved from one house and into this wonderful cottage. Now, I don't have many regrets about moving, but one regret I have is that when my friend Kristen with Garden Gate magazine called and wanted to know if I would be interested in going on a trip, Stuart, a trip to Great Britain and or a trip to Normandy and or a trip to Ireland this year to see some of the iconic gardens. Let's just say it's one of the regrets of my life that I can't go, Kristen, maybe next year, but some of you can. And this would make the best Valentine's Day gift or Mother's Day gift ever. Sign up for one of the Garden Gate magazine trips to really gardening wonderland in Europe. They're going to take a trip in May and they're going to go to the Chelsea Flower Show. They're going to go to Sissinghurst, Longbarn, just iconic British gardens. And then I think it's a little bit later in the year, in the summer, probably in July, I believe she told me they're going to go to Ireland. I'm not sure what gardens they're going to see, but I'm sure they'll be absolutely fabulous. Yeah, and then in August, they're going to go to Normandy in France and visit those gardens. And like I say, it's a big regret. I'm too busy getting my own garden established here at the cottage because I would love to take one of those trips and really just submerge myself and indulge myself in the gardens of Europe. So if you guys want to maybe get a Valentine's Day gift for a loved one, or you're just a passionate gardener, then encourage a loved one to book you on one of these trips with Garden Gate magazine.
Wonderful idea.
Yeah, it's a wonderful idea. I'm so sorry I can't go this year, but I am going to try to go next year. So Kristen, why don't you tell everyone a little bit more about these European garden tours that you've got planned?
Thanks, Linda. We are really excited to share some of the highlights from Garden Gate's tours with readers to England last year. We were able to travel to England 2 times, once in July and once in September. We kicked off our first trip in July at the Hampton Court Palace Garden Festival. Oh my gosh, it was so inspiring. There were all these different displays from garden designers of such inspiring and unique just different displays, lots of different flowers, and you know.
In July, it looked great.
Oh yeah.
And then that floral marquee building with all the plant material. I mean, all just displayed alliums, everything you asked for, you could see.
I don't think I've ever seen as many varieties.
I took so many photos that day.
Yeah, there was a lot to see there. And then of course, you know, if we could have shopped, and if I had, 4 bags to bring home, I could have filled them up. It was a lot of fun.
And we saw a lot of stuff we don't see back here.
That's true.
That's unique to the UK, so it was really fascinating.
Yeah, well, and it was just so cool to experience that day. It was just thousands and thousands of people on, I don't know, something like 30-some acres of ground in this historic palace. Yeah. And it was just all garden lovers, so it's just not that often that you're around that many people who love gardening as much as you do, so it was all garden.
Exactly.
It was just great. But the thing I'm really also super excited about is that in May of this year, we're going to Chelsea, which is the Chelsea Flower Show. So that is also a bucket list event, and it should be very similar to the Hampton Court Palace show. It's just iconic. So we're excited.
Exactly. So our first garden on that first trip was the iconic Sissinghurst. Yeah. And it was just amazing.
What a way to start.
To pull up there, and everyone got off the bus, and it was kind of a new prairie out there by the parking lot, right? Yeah. But we walked up, and the tower, you could just see it.
Yeah, you walk right through the
I mean, that's the first place I went, just to get the lay of the land, go up in the tower so you could look around and see the different gardens.
See all the garden rooms that were laid out originally by Vita Sackville West.
Correct.
And the famous White Garden, so beautiful. That's just iconic, of course.
Oh, just the plant combinations and the beds, I mean, and the colors, it was great. And then the new garden we got to see.
Yeah, the Delos Garden, So I think that was something that was started by them, but they never really found it to be successful. Right. And then in recent years, it's been revamped and redone. And so this
in their vision.
With their vision in mind. So this Mediterranean beautiful Mediterranean garden.
Yeah.
But I love all the reseeding annuals throughout the garden, and it kind of, it's just that classic sort of cottage style arts and crafts movement era. And I think her philosophy on planting was cram, 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 and you can totally see that. Everything, there was just everything growing together. It was so beautiful, and I'm really excited to see it. We saw it in July last year, and now we're going back to that same garden in May, so I'm super excited to see, when the roses are just at their first bloom. And
also, talking about her vision, I mean, we got to see Long Barn, which was like her first garden, and that's also on the trip that's coming up this year too.
It is, and that was really fun to see how they sort of started their design philosophy.
It was like their starter garden, Long Barn was,
What
right?
a great place to start.
Yeah.
But, beautiful borders there, and then they took all that information and applied it
so
to
you could see,
Sissinghurst.
you could see the similarities and the inspiration there. So
and the nice thing at Long Barn is that we get to speak with the garden owner. It's a private home, and so you can only visit by appointment and have tea and cake in the garden and have her tell stories about all the research she's done about Vita and Harold, and also just kind of talk about the property.
We're so passionate about it, and knowing the story and trying to keep it alive.
Yeah, it's really
great.
It is cool. Another great iconic garden that we got to visit last summer was Great Dexter, which I mean, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of and probably seen photos of. Christopher Lloyd is the person who established this garden in the early 20th century, and he lived there until well into his 90s, and when he passed away and left this garden, but it's still maintained in the same style under which it was established, which was sort of groundbreaking at the time. And again, I mean, just exuberant plantings.
So full. I mean, it's just so thick of plantings everywhere in the color.
Right, yes, very much so. And I think it's all, and also the wildflower meadow kind of approach is something that was sort of groundbreaking when they established it many years ago. And then it's all sort of against this medieval structure in the house, and we got to tour the house as well, which was really interesting. And then all these beautiful hedges that are pruned in such whimsical ways, so it seems like it could be a very serious place, but actually there are these undulating hedges and whimsically trained topiaries.
And you walk to another part of the garden, and it's just so tight and compact with all those plantings, but then it's more loose and
it's really beautiful.
It is.
And so we're excited to see that again in May, actually, this year as well, so we can see it in a different season.
And on these trips with these people, we're traveling with 20, 25 people that are all garden lovers, so we get back on the bus after viewing these gardens, and everyone talks about what their favorite part of it was. Did you see this? Did you see that?
Yes.
So that's what's so great to be able to talk about it.
And remember how excited people were every day before we got to some of these gardens that they knew, they'd heard of. Even the Hampton Court, and Great Dexter and Sissinghurst, it was just sort of like electric on the bus. Everyone was so excited to see these places.
Giddy to see it,
so
for sure. Another must-see garden in England that we went to last year, we're going to go to this year, is Wisley.
Yes, the Royal Horticulture Society display gardens.
Yes.
Yes.
So it's a large public garden, and it has everything, really.
Anything you can picture, you can just imagine is there,
I know some of the people that were on the tour last year, that's the one place that they wanted to go.
Yeah,
right?
That's true, Well, it's just all these demonstration gardens. The rock garden is beautiful.
That was my favorite part. I love that.
It was beautiful. And then sort of this, you probably have seen the photos of the iconic sort of water garden with the water lilies in front of the beautiful structure. And then there's borders designed by Pete Udolph, which
they're so long, and the borders are so deep too that you don't see that so much here either. How deep the borders are, it's just plants,
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. But I mean, and then collections of almost anything you can picture. I saw beautiful rose garden and dahlia gardens and sweet peas. I've never smelled so many sweet peas before. It was really fun. You may have also seen the famous red borders at Hitcott, which this garden was designed by Lawrence Johnston, an American actually, early in the 20th century. And these gardens are full of just different garden rooms, each with its own sort of character and design style and
there were
plant palette.
Passageways from one garden to the next. And I think we hit the red border at its peak in September last year.
So too.
It was just spectacular.
All red flowers, red foliage. It was really beautiful.
So most of the gardens that we've talked about so far were designed in the 20th century,
Right.
but there's a whole group of gardens in England that were designed before that.
Years and years and years
Yeah,
before
that are open to the public.
Right, yeah.
And so,
So including Stourhead,
Yeah.
which is one we visited in September, and it's about 250 years old, the garden is, and it's sort of built, it's designed in the English landscape style, a more naturalistic style
Yeah.
of garden, and it's all about views and vistas and sort of landscape features and trees and shrubs. And so there's beautiful water, a man-made lake with bridges and ruins and a grotto and just all kinds of sort of magical things to explore.
another old garden on our tour was Parham House, right?
yeah.
I think it's the best surviving example of Elizabethan architecture in England.
The home is, yeah.
The home
that's
is, which
yeah,
we toured, and it
yeah.
was fantastic,
Yeah,
right?
it really was.
But the walled garden, a 4-acre walled garden,
Yeah,
long borders, huh?
18th century.
Yeah.
Yeah, also very old and beautiful.
Rose garden, cut flower garden. I
Yeah,
mean,
lots to
they're
see
so
there.
great, lots to see,
Yeah.
lot to photograph. Yeah.
Sudley Castle was another stop where there was so much history,
Yeah.
and this was a castle that Catherine Parr retired to after Henry VIII died, and that's where she died actually, and is buried. And so there are a lot of interesting ruins there.
Oh,
There's
yeah,
a
very
connection to Queen Elizabeth, the
Yeah.
first.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of beautiful newer flower borders and rose collection and borders, and just a lot to see there.
Yes, it's not as well known as some other gardens, so I think people came away really surprised.
Yeah, it
And
was fun,
yeah,
and to
it
be
was
able
a
to tour
really
the
good
church and the
stop.
castle, and
Yeah,
it
there was a
fun.
lot there.
Linda, this was so much fun. I hope you can join us sometime on one of our trips. Iford Manor was another really
Yes.
big treat on this in our tours last summer, and I think one of the things that made it so interesting was that we got a personal tour from the owner of the property,
Yes.
William, and the stories that he told
Yeah.
made it even more enjoyable than just absorbing
Yeah.
the beautiful views and
Right.
interesting landscape there.
Yeah, I mean, he had so many stories to tell.
Yeah.
It was a garden designed by Harold Peto.
Yep, in the
and-
20th century. Yep.
Yeah,
uh-huh.
and it's just a very eclectic garden, a lot of influences there.
Yeah, from
and
his
it-
travels, and
Yeah.
he'd done a lot of traveling in Italy and
Correct.
brought all these things back and established this garden.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And William was a real scholar of the
Yeah.
property and the history of it. So he really took his time and explained. Everyone on the tour just was
Yeah, loved it.
Loved it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we had a great lunch at their restaurant after.
Yeah.
It was lovely.
Another stop was Kifsgate Court, which has a rich history with 3 generations of
All women.
Yes,
I
all
love that.
women.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting. And also, it's on a hillside, very much like
Yes.
Iford Manor, but designed in a completely different way.
Yeah. 2
and
water
style.
features, a very modern water feature,
Yep.
and then one with that just has a spectacular
Oh,
view of the countryside.
That view.
I think everyone paused there for quite a while.
Yeah, we took a lot of photos there.
Yeah,
At Denman's, we got to see a more modern approach to gardening.
Yes.
This is the garden of
John Brooks.
Yeah, John Brooks,
Yeah.
very well-known garden designer, especially
Mhm.
in the last few decades.
Right.
And before he died, this was his garden.
He lived on the
And,
property,
Yeah, he
right?
lived on the property
Yep.
and gardened here, and so it was a much more modern approach where there's a lot of sort of gravel
Yeah.
pathways and hardscaping moving throughout the property.
Yeah.
He liked a blue for
Oh,
benches.
Denman's
and,
blue.
Yeah,
the
so it was
benches,
kind of, became
I know
one of
it
his
had a
favorites.
real California feel. A
It
part of that
did.
garden.
It did,
you know,
really, didn't it?
With the
Yeah.
gravel and
Very modern
some
and casual.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And it had a garden shop that people could
Yeah.
look around and
yeah, that was fun.
yeah. Another public garden we stopped at was Sussex Prairie.
Mm-hmm.
It's a garden shop, but it's also a nursery to extent.
An event center.
Event center, but it's 8 acres, I think,
Yep,
right?
I think
and
that's right.
30,000 plants. And Paul and Pauline McBride, and they used to work for Pete
Udolph,
who-
yes,
and,
uh-huh.
and they started this garden in England.
Yep.
And
I think
Pauline,
about 15 years ago,
yeah,
maybe
15
they
years
planted.
ago.
Mhm.
And Pauline gave us a brief description of how the garden started.
She was such a great tour guide, so
Yeah,
colorful and fun.
she brought all her friends in,
Yeah.
and they planted all these plants like
Yeah.
over a week or something like that.
Right, yeah, it's a great
Yeah.
story. She just tells a great story
Well,
about it.
And the other fascinating thing about that is at the end of the year, they burn a
They
lot
do.
of their
Yes, they burn it
plant
down.
material. Burn
Yeah.
it down. Yep.
So interesting story just to hear about how it was established and
Yeah.
then also how it's how it's cared for, but
Yeah.
also we saw it at a really great time in the summer when so many perennials and grasses, and
Right.
it's just full of movement and
Yeah,
color
so much
and
space there, and
pollinators.
you can walk around and get long vistas of these borders. And
Yeah.
you know, when you hear, like as Americans, you hear prairie and you have something in your head of what a prairie is going to look
Yeah.
like. It really wasn't like an American prairie.
No, not quite, but a lot of the same plants, and
Yeah.
still just a beautiful,
Yeah.
beautiful place to be.
When we were putting together the itinerary on these trips, we tried to get a combination of public and private gardens.
yeah.
And so we toured a lot of private gardens. And we were the only ones in these gardens. We
Yeah.
oftentimes met the owners and the designers, and they gave us a talk or presentation.
Yeah, it
and
was
the history of the
interesting.
garden. It was very
And
interesting.
you could ask questions,
Yeah.
and kind of get their techniques and tips on how they care for certain plants, or
Yeah.
what their challenges are, how they deal with different challenges. And so it was interesting. One of the gardens was one of the newest gardens we saw was
Yes.
Brightling Down,
Mhm.
and this was a garden that has all kinds of interesting features to it, including a woodland walk and a walled vegetable garden and this really beautiful pond where I actually
Yeah.
got to see Gunnera up close and personal
Oh,
for the very first
huge.
time.
Yeah.
I didn't
That was-
realize they were so spiky, and the
Yeah.
flowers were down. I mean, there was so
They
much
did a
to
couple
learn about
plantings
that.
of those. It was
Yeah,
amazing.
it was really
Yeah.
beautiful, and an Asian-inspired
So well done.
area.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was just really fun, and in all cases,
Yeah.
I think you're right, just getting to have interactions with the owners.
The owner greeted us
And-
and the gardener. who
Yeah,
keeps track-
yeah,
talked to us
really
about their
great.
vegetable gardens. Sure.
Yep, very interesting. At St. Timothy's, we got to see a garden that was voted England's favorite garden a couple of years ago.
Correct.
In the National Garden
Yeah.
Scheme. And
It's a newer garden. And,
yeah, maybe
and,
10 or 15 years old.
And Sarah Pashwani, the
Yeah,
owner, who gave us a lecture, a slideshow, and
Yeah.
the history before and after. I mean, she's a new gardener too, but
Yeah.
she was just
Oh.
so passionate, and she just dove in and
Yeah, she
really
showed
wants
us-
to make that a destination.
Yeah, there's so
Yeah.
many pretty borders and wildlife plantings, and a boxwood parterre, I believe, was
Yes,
there. And
yep.
yeah, and again, Sarah made cake and tea, and
Yeah.
we got to
Well, that
enjoy
yeah.
that with her and her
Like she had
husband.
lavender water. What was that?
Yeah.
Something? It was just like
Yeah, so fun.
Really.
It was a fun.
Well, that's the thing about these trips, and some of these gardens in England, they're set up to receive guests. So
Yeah.
like 25 people, and they're used to it. So when our coach rolls in and 25 people come off, they're ready for us and they've got space for us.
Yeah.
That's what's really cool
It
on
is
these
really
tours.
cool.
Yeah. Another private garden was Pettifers, which is, I think, considered a townhouse garden.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Which was different. And but it was one of my favorites on either trip. It really was. It was
I
so
think it was,
fascinating. The owner was
yeah.
gone, but the gardener met us and greeted us and talked about the garden and the history of the garden and such innovative plant combinations there. And,
Yeah, just
yeah.
beautiful
I think-
colors, and
Yeah.
just
And
there was so much going on.
I
So
think
many beautiful
Gina
borders.
Price started that garden in 1990, and I think she was a
Similar.
novice gardener too.
Yeah, I think you're right.
But it's just
Yeah, so
spectacular
colorful.
now.
Yeah. Of course, the gardens were all just beautiful on these trips,
Yes.
but I don't think the trip would have been as memorable or as enjoyable without being able to have that experience
Yeah.
with a group of other people who
Yeah.
loved gardening just as much
Yeah.
as I do.
Because every night we'd get together for dinner and we could talk about the gardens
Yeah.
that we just saw, and also we learned about each other's gardens, and
Yeah.
we shared photos of our gardens with
Right.
each other.
There was
and-
lots of phone pic sharing
Yeah,
going on
exactly.
the bus between
Yeah.
gardens, and
Yeah.
I mean, I know some people have even gotten together after the trips.
Yes, right.
Because they made friends
Back in
and
the States,
yeah,
yeah.
So that once they're home now, they're connecting as well.
Yep.
And I mean, we've stayed in contact with a lot of people on these trips.
Yeah.
It was so fun to get to know people,
Yeah.
and then to have these really memorable experiences together. I just can't
Yeah.
wait because
We
doing
have
it
some more
again.
and some that went last year are going to come back and
That's
tour
right.
with us this year too. So they had
Yeah.
so much fun last year that they're coming back. So we're going to go to Chelsea in England in May,
in May, yes.
and then we're going to go to Ireland in Bloom. That's in July.
In July,
Yep.
yeah. So we'll be visiting the Dublin area and then heading down toward Cork and visiting a lot of gardens there. So, lots of lush plantings and really friendly. I'm
Yep.
expecting, I can't wait to meet the gardeners in Ireland.
Yeah. And then August, we go to Normandy.
Yes.
And Monet's garden and along the coast there. It should be so fascinating.
It really should,
Yep.
and there's so much history. So
Yeah.
Monet is that's a newer garden,
Yeah.
but then all these medieval villages and
Yeah.
beautiful, I think there'll be centuries and centuries of garden design that you'll
Yeah.
be looking, that we'll be looking at. So we're really excited about these tours in 2023.